Your next news update is at 8:30. Continuous coverage of news, traffic, and weather at 560theanswer.com. Chicago's Morning Answer continues now on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Papa Nicholas Coffee. Papa Nicholas, best beans, best roast, best coffee.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Former U.S. ambassador to the Ukraine, Ambassador Yovanovitch, is now seated listening to Adam Schiff read from one of the draft screenplays he's working on. So second day of impeachment hearings will proceed in earnest.
And I'm just wondering who's going to play her on Saturday Night Live this coming weekend. You know?
And we know Andy Kaufman is not available to play Adam Schiff.
No,
that's
because
too bad. Yesterday, in assessing day one and framing the impeachment hearing, Nancy Pelosi had a couple of important things to say, and the way that she said them. Here's what we have. Even though she said we haven't made a determination on impeachment yet because this is why we have an inquiry, we're going through a process. And then after, of course, gathering all of the information, we'll make a thoughtful decision. Well, I don't know how you square that statement with this one.
Well, you know, we talking Latin around here, e pluribus unum from anyone. Quid pro quo.
I'm surprised you got that right.
Bribery, and that is in the Constitution attached to the impeachment proceedings. So what was the bribe here? The bribe is to grant or withhold military assistance in return for a public statement of a fake investigation into the elections. So that's bribery.
Yeah. So bribery has now been, quid pro quo is now synonymous with bribery, and bribery has now been redefined as I give you something and I get nothing. It's a non-traditional definition, but okay. But then it got weird. If you don't think
that was strange enough.
If you don't
think... Wait, a drag queen interrupted her press conference?
No, Pissy Miles was not in attendance, as far as I know. Hopefully she will be back today.
Yeah.
No, all roads lead to Putin. Now, this is an administration that provided Javelin anti-tank missiles to Ukraine so they could defend themselves against Russian revanchism, Russian military action. But in point of fact, this is all part and parcel of the story Donald Trump Manchurian candidate for Putin.
This had a story, a narrative about the president threatening to grant or withhold certain privileges, certain military assistance voted on by the Congress to Ukraine, which is in our national interest to do so because they were fighting the Russians. They've already lost over 11,000, 12,000, 13,000 people fighting the Russians. That's why I say all roads lead to Putin. Putin benefited from our not any holding up of that foreign military assistance. Putin benefited by the action taken by the president vis-a-vis Syria and Turkey because they wanted a stronghold in the Middle East, and the president gave them that. Putin benefited from the president's comments about uncertainty about our support for NATO. Putin benefited. The list goes on. I won't even go into the elections, just those three, because they're the three I have mentioned to the president when I have said, with you, Mr. President, all roads lead to Putin.
So, the Russian collusion investigation is not over as far as Nancy Pelosi is concerned. I mean, referencing a Mueller report that exonerated him on colluding.
Right.
And
she brings it back as if there's something viable to that report.
And arming Ukrainians against the Russians. This is all an elaborate ruse to advance the interests of Mother Russia. Okay. Dan McCarthy is the author at Spectator. He's the director of Robert Novak Fellowship Program at the Fund for American Studies and editor of Modern Age, a conservative review. Daniel, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Boy, I don't know what you want to take first. I guess the all roads lead to Putin argument. Is Nancy Pelosi off script?
No, I don't think so. I mean, this is what they've been hammering for the last 3 years, since before the 2016 election, and it's still the backbone of the entire narrative they want to get across here. The idea being that everything Donald Trump does is somehow antithetical to the interests of the United States, serving the interests of Russia and Vladimir Putin. It's a very xenophobic, paranoid argument, but they are so invested in it that I don't think they can afford to give it up.
So it's even when he does things that are antithetical to Russian interests, he's still actually somehow advancing Russian interests.
That's right, as you have suggested. I mean, this is a very wacky and sort of surrealistic argument, but it's one that the Democrats seem to believe if they just repeat it often enough and keep coming back to it, that Americans will actually believe it.
And the assessment of the case that the Democrats are making, which is, for all the talk about hearsay, what they're really trying to say, and Mike Quigley just doesn't have the vocabulary for it, is that you can make out a circumstantial case, and it's it's in a sense it's sort of a reasonable doubt standard. Here's the circumstances under which people were communicating, under which the aid was temporarily held, even though it was ultimately released. And the circumstantial cases, based even on some hearsay, which wouldn't be admitted in court, but this is not a court of law, suggests that Trump was trying to get the investigation done that was more important to him than the military aid. And that very thing, if true, is a high crime and or misdemeanor.
That's certainly the case they're trying to make, although it's, as you suggest, rather a thin reed on which to build this case. Ukraine is a troubled country, not only because of the difficulties they're having with Russia's influence in the East, but also because Ukraine itself has some very unstable politics. The current president, Zelensky, was elected on an anti-corruption campaign because of the really extensive corruption the country had suffered for many years before he came into office. So it seems to me that there's a pretty clear case to be made here that any American administration, whether it's Trump or anyone else, should have been proceeding quite slowly with giving money and U.S. aid to a country that's had as many sorts of difficulties as Ukraine has had, as many sort of internal political, corruption-related, and crime-related, oligarch-related, even extremist-related problems. So the Democrats have to make the case that none of this really counts, that there is no reasonable case to be made for taking things carefully and slowly with Ukraine, and that instead it should have been a kind of rubber stamp that proceeded, and the only way that it was not a rubber stamp was because Donald Trump had some political motive related to the 2020 election. And I think that's a very difficult case to make in a persuasive way to the American public.
And the former ambassador to Ukraine is before the House committee right now. What do you expect to learn, if anything, from her testimony today?
Well, I think the Democrats are expecting her simply to make the case that Donald Trump runs a very sort of personally interested and personally driven kind of foreign policy, and that he had political concerns about her, and that these concerns were somehow illegitimate, and therefore, her dismissal was inappropriate. I think Republicans are going to be very interested in some of Yovanovitch's actions as ambassador, and whether she put pressure on the Ukrainians to dismiss an investigation, for example, into an organization connected to George Soros. It seems to me that both the Democrats and the Republicans see an opportunity here, but it's really kind of a sidelight to the main question of what was going on with regard to events after Yovanovitch was dismissed as ambassador, events concerning President Trump's call with Zelensky thereafter.
It's this Peggy Noonan column on day one on Wednesday is sort of remarkable to me. I mean, this is I don't know if this is just these hearings, sort of like Trump himself, are a bit of a Rorschach for both proponents and opponents, that you sort of see what you want to see, or we have a Rashomon effect going on. But she writes about Wednesday's hearing. Republicans on the panel didn't know what to do because the witnesses were so credible. They know what the story is, and I believe they absolutely know the president muscled an ally holding public money over its head to get a personal political favor. But they're his party. They didn't want to look weak. They had to show the base they had his back. In their interruptions and chaos strewing, they attempted to do some of what the Democrats did during the Kavanaugh hearings, only without screaming memes of Code Pink. I saw almost nothing of what she's describing.
Yeah, and it seems that even much of the mainstream press has reported that it was a bit of a dud on Wednesday. That there are reports now that even internal discussions that Nancy Pelosi has had with other Democrats have come to the conclusion that so far the hearings have not begun to shift public opinion and really have not presented any kind of bombshell that would drive home the case they want to make. So there's a lot of people who, conservatives and others, who want to go out on a limb to be as fair as possible to the Democrats and, try to say that there's no sort of political agenda that's being pursued by the Democrats relative to 2020 and to try to embarrass as many Republican senators as well as the president in order to, sort of affect next year's election. But I think most people are pretty clear that this is an extremely partisan process that's going on. When the House had a vote about a week ago to authorize official impeachment inquiry proceedings, what we're now getting into, not only was the vote pretty much party line, but in fact, it was there were two Democrats who voted with Republicans and said that this investigation is not warranted. It's really a partisan effort on behalf of Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi that is not even successful in keeping all Democrats on board with this project, and it certainly isn't convincing any Republican or anyone out in the middle of the country.
Who wants to get this over the most quickly? Is it Republicans or Democrats? Because it would seem to me you could make a case, even if this is boomerang on Democrats, that it's still President Trump and the Republicans. They want to frame the election in 2020 the way that President Trump framed his administration before the Economic Club of New York this week, where he stated, where he made a statement he's made before that, basically, as long as I'm here, this is never going to be a socialist country, and framing this as markets and market reforms and entrepreneurship and support for the job creators that have engendered record low unemployment, 2 million people off of the welfare rolls, and significant household income increases compared to the previous administrations. That's what we can have if we continue on this program. Otherwise, it's going to be Elizabeth Warren, and you're not going to be able to keep your private health insurance or anything that has private in front of it. It seems to me that's where Trump wants to be, and this is preventing him from being there.
The impeachment circus certainly makes the case that Democrats don't have a sufficiently attractive agenda of their own, that they're confident to promote that as something to challenge Donald Trump. The Democrats aren't out there talking about Medicare for all. They're not out there talking about, other proposals of Biden or Sanders or Warren. Instead, they want to make this all about Trump. They want to make it all about the allegations they've been, running for the last 3 or 4 years here. And, I think if the American people agree with Trump that his agenda is being sidelined by this circus, then that's going to play very well for the Republicans. On the other hand, maybe the Democrats are happy to see that, the news cycle is not paying attention to the, health of the economy, is not paying attention to the very successful things that are happening, and instead is being, sort of shifted onto these very obscure topics as to what's happening in Ukraine. Maybe the Democrats think that distraction actually serves them. The real big question is that as we come up to 2020 and the New Hampshire and Iowa primaries, how many senators, Democratic senators who are on the campaign trail, are going to want to have an impeachment proceeding that's going to require them to be back in Washington when they would much rather be out in the field campaigning for the Democratic nomination.
He is Daniel McCarthy, author at The Spectator, director of the Robert Novak Fellowship Program at the Fund for American Studies, of which I'm a graduate, Amy.
Oh, okay.
And editor of Modern Age, a conservative review. Daniel, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
This Thanksgiving, think outside the oven with a brand new grill from the Ace Thanks Grilling event this Saturday, November 16th from 11 to 2. Head to your local Ace for great deals, giveaways, and turkey grilling demos, showcasing our top brands like Traeger, Weber, Big Green Egg, and more. Plus, get free assembly and delivery on grills $3.99 and up. Don't miss the Thanks Grilling event this Saturday from 11 to 2 at your local Ace. See participating stores for scheduling or exclusions. Free assembly and delivery for Ace Rewards members valid through December 24th.
Ace is the place with the helpful hardware, folks.
Doesn't it seem like things are always getting more expensive? Groceries, the rent, even utilities. Cost of living is up, but Allstate can help lower your cost of driving. With new lower auto rates in Illinois, you get the same high-quality coverage and hands-on expertise from a local Allstate agent. Now with new lower rates, you're in good hands with Allstate.
If you haven't quoted Allstate lately, it's the perfect time. Get a quote today. Subject to terms, conditions, and availability. Savings vary.